Derek Patterson strode through like he owned the building. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished floor as he approached the nurse's station, his face already twisted in irritation. "I've been waiting 20 minutes, he announced to no one in particular, loud enough for everyone in the corridor to hear. 20 minutes for a pre-surgery consultation I scheduled weeks ago. Is this how you run a hospital?" The nurse behind the desk, a patient woman named Rita who had seen every type of personality in her 30 years of service, maintained her calm smile. "Mr. Patterson, Dr. Coleman will be with you shortly. She's just finishing with another patient." "Dr. Coleman," Derek scoffed, checking his expensive watch again. "I was told I'd have the best cardiac surgeon in the region. I paid extra for premium care. This is ridiculous." Down the hallway, a figure emerged from the staff lounge. She wore standard surgical scrubs in navy blue, and her pregnant belly was visible beneath the loose fabric. She carried a tablet and a coffee cup, walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the exhaustion that came with being 6 months pregnant while maintaining a demanding surgical schedule, her posture was perfect. Derek's eyes landed on her, and his expression shifted from irritation to barely concealed disgust. He elbowed the man standing next to him, another patient waiting for an appointment, and spoke in a voice that carried down the entire corridor. "You see that?" Derek said, gesturing toward the pregnant woman approaching the nurse's station. "That's exactly what's wrong with healthcare today. They'll hire anyone. Look at her waddling around in scrubs. Probably can't even reach over that belly to do anything useful." The other patient looked uncomfortable and stepped away slightly, but Derek was on a roll, his voice growing louder. "My company has standards," he continued, addressing the nurses now. "We don't let people work when they're clearly not fit for the job. How is someone in that condition supposed to handle medical emergencies? It's irresponsible. The hospital should have her on leave, not parading around where sick people need actual help." Rita's face hardened. "Mr. Patterson, I really think you should." "No, I'm serious," Derek interrupted, warming to his subject. He had an audience now, several people in the waiting area watching the scene unfold. "I mean, look at her. She probably can't even see her own feet. And they expect us to trust our lives to people who can't maintain basic physical fitness? It's a joke. The whole system is broken." He turned back to Rita. "Is this Dr. Coleman as incompetent as the rest of the staff here? Because I'm paying top dollar and I expect top quality. Not someone who's going to be distracted or too tired to do their job properly. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The pregnant woman had stopped walking. She stood about 10 feet from the nurse's station now, her tablet held loosely in one hand, her coffee in the other. She was perfectly still, her face composed and unreadable. She didn't say a word. She simply watched Derek continue his tirade, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. "I have standards," Derek repeated, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "I built a multi-million-dollar real estate development company from nothing. Nothing. I know what excellence looks like, and this," he gestured broadly at the hallway, including the pregnant woman in his sweep, "this is not excellence. This is barely adequate. If I ran my business this way, I'd be bankrupt." A younger nurse at the station, Jessica, glanced nervously between Derek and the silent woman down the hall. She opened her mouth to say something, but Rita shook her head minutely. "Wait," her expression said. "Just wait." Derek was still talking. "And another thing, where I come from, we have dress codes. Professional appearance standards. We don't let employees show up looking like they're about to drop a—" "Mr. Patterson," Rita interrupted firmly. "Dr. Coleman is here now." Derek barely paused. "Finally. Someone competent. Where is he? I want to get this consultation over with so I can file a complaint about." "I'm Dr. Coleman." The voice came from behind him. Smooth, professional, with just a hint of something Derek couldn't quite identify. He turned around, confused, and found himself facing the pregnant woman in scrubs. Up close he could see her face more clearly. She had beautiful features, high cheekbones, clear skin, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of his memory, but he couldn't place it. "You're Dr. Coleman?" Derek's voice dripped with skepticism. "You're the senior cardiac surgeon?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate. She stood there waiting, her expression neutral. Derek laughed, an ugly sound that made several people in the waiting area look away in embarrassment. "This is a joke, right? Someone's idea of a prank? I'm scheduled for a critical cardiac procedure and they assign me." He stopped mid-sentence. really looked at her face for the first time. The shape of her eyes. The curve of her jaw. The way she held herself with quiet dignity despite his verbal assault. His brain, sluggish with the cardiac medications he'd been taking, suddenly made the connection. The color drained from his face. Natasha. The name came out as barely a whisper. Dr. Coleman, she corrected, her voice still perfectly professional. Shall we proceed to the consultation room, Mr. Patterson? We have a lot to discuss about your condition. Derek's mouth opened and closed several times. He looked like a fish drowning in air. The pregnant belly. The surgical scrubs. The title of senior cardiac surgeon. None of it made sense. The last time he'd seen Natasha Coleman, she was his wife, crying in their living room while he packed his bags 3 years ago. She'd been a struggling surgical resident then, exhausted and emotional, barely holding herself together. She definitely wasn't pregnant. She definitely wasn't standing in front of him looking like she could buy and sell him with her credentials alone. I didn't, he stammered. I know you didn't, Natasha said calmly. She turned to Rita. Please have someone bring Mr. Patterson's file to consultation room 3. Also have Dr. Harrison join us. I want a second opinion on the valve replacement approach. She looked back at Derek and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something deeper and more complex. Then it was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. This way, Mr. Patterson. She walked past him, her pregnant belly leading the way, her posture straight and her head high. Derek stood frozen, replaying every word he'd just said in the hallway. Every cruel comment. Every mocking gesture. He'd said all of it directly in front of the one person who had every reason to hate him, the woman whose life he'd destroyed, the woman who was now, apparently, the only surgeon skilled enough to save his failing heart. Mr. Patterson? Natasha had paused at the consultation room door, looking back at him with raised eyebrows. Your time is valuable as you mentioned. Shall we begin? Derek's legs felt like water, but he forced himself to move. Behind him, he heard whispered conversations starting up at the nurse's station. Rita's voice carried clearly, "That's Karma right there. That's exactly what Karma looks like." He followed Natasha into the consultation room, his heart pounding irregularly in his chest, each beat reminding him why he was here. He needed this surgery. His cardiologist had been very clear. Without intervention, Derek had maybe 3 months to live. His heart was failing, damaged by years of stress, poor diet, and genetics. The valve replacement was complicated, risky, and required the absolute best surgeon available. And the absolute best surgeon available was the woman he'd betrayed, humiliated, and abandoned 3 years ago. As Natasha set her tablet on the consultation table and pulled up his medical files, Derek noticed her hands. They were steady. Completely steady. There was no tremor of emotion, no sign of the crying, broken woman he remembered. She wore a simple engagement ring on her left hand, a beautiful sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Different from the modest gold band he'd given her during their marriage. She was different. Everything about her was different. And as she began explaining his cardiac condition in clear, confident medical terminology, Derek realized with growing dread that she held his life in her hands. The woman he'd destroyed now had the power to save him or let him die. And he had just spent 10 minutes insulting her in front of her colleagues and patients. The consultation room suddenly felt very small. Natasha pulled up an image on the large monitor mounted on the wall. It showed Derek's heart, the damaged valve clearly visible. As you can see, Mr. Patterson, your condition is critical. The mitral valve is severely compromised. Without surgical intervention within the next 2 weeks, you're looking at complete heart failure. Derek couldn't speak. He just stared at the screen, at the image of his failing heart, while the woman he'd betrayed explained exactly how close to death he really was. 3 years earlier, Natasha Coleman Patterson had believed in happy endings. She believed in love, commitment, and the promise that hard work eventually paid off. She'd believed in her marriage. She was 29 years old, a third-year surgical resident at County Medical Center, working rotations that frequently lasted 36 hours. Her body ran on coffee, determination, and the dream of one day becoming a surgeon who could make a real difference. Sleep was a luxury. Free time was a myth. But she loved it. Every minute in the OR, every patient she helped save, every skill she mastered, it all meant something. Derek had been different when they met in college. He was ambitious, yes, but also warm. Funny. He made her laugh during study breaks. He brought her food during finals week. He told her she was brilliant and beautiful and that he'd support her dreams no matter what. They got married right after graduation, both of them full of plans and possibilities. But medical school and residency had tested their marriage in ways Natasha hadn't anticipated. While she spent years in training, Derek built his real estate development company. He started small, flipping houses, then moved into commercial properties. His success grew faster than hers, at least in terms of income. He was making six figures while she was earning a residence salary that barely covered student loan payments. The money changed him. Or maybe it just revealed who he'd always been underneath. He started making comments about her schedule, her exhaustion, her lack of availability. He wanted her at business dinners, networking events, social functions that she simply couldn't attend when she was on call or in surgery. He wanted a wife who looked good on his arm and made his colleagues impressed. He wanted someone who had time to plan elaborate dinner parties and join him on spontaneous weekend trips. Natasha tried. She really tried. She'd come home after a 14-hour shift and cook dinner. She'd skip sleep to attend his important events. She'd smile and make small talk with his business partners while her eyes burned with exhaustion. But it was never enough. The fight started small. You're always tired. You never have time for me. This isn't the marriage I signed up for. They grew bigger. You care more about your patients than your husband. You're selfish. You're not the woman I married. Natasha had tried to explain that residency was temporary, that once she finished her training, things would be better. She tried to remind him that he'd promised to support her career. She tried to tell him that being a surgeon wasn't just a job, it was who she was. He stopped listening. Then came Amber, his secretary. 23 years old, always available, always smiling, always ready to travel or attend events or stay late at the office. Natasha had met her once at a company party. Amber had been friendly, complimenting Natasha's dress, asking questions about surgery that seemed genuinely interested. Natasha had liked her. The affair probably went on for months before Natasha discovered it. She'd been too tired, too trusting, too focused on her patients to notice the signs. The late-night work emergencies. The new cologne. The way Derek pulled away when she tried to touch him. And then came that night. The night that changed everything. Natasha had finished her rotation early, a rare gift. She'd stopped by the pharmacy and picked up the pregnancy test she'd been too nervous to buy before. In the hospital bathroom, she'd watched the two pink lines appear, and her world had shifted on its axis. Baby. She was going to have a baby. Despite the exhaustion, despite the stress, despite everything, she was going to be a mother. She'd driven home with her mind racing, planning how to tell Derek. He'd been unhappy lately, distant and critical, but surely this would change things. A baby could bring them back together. They could be a family. She could make it work, balance residency and motherhood. Other doctors did it. She could too. She'd stopped at the grocery store and bought everything for his favorite meal. Salmon with roasted vegetables, the good bread from the bakery, the wine he liked. She'd picked up fresh flowers for the table. She'd even bought a tiny pair of baby shoes to use as part of the announcement. She put them on his plate as a surprise. When she got home, Derek's car was in the driveway. Good. He was home early for once. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe everything was going to be okay. She'd walked into the house carrying grocery bags, calling out his name. No answer. She'd set everything on the kitchen counter and walked through the quiet house. Their bedroom door was closed. She'd opened it. Derek and Amber were in their bed. Their marital bed. The sheets Natasha had washed that morning before her shift. They weren't just kissing. They were fully engaged, too involved to notice the door opening right away. Natasha had stood there, frozen, the pregnancy test still in her pocket, watching her marriage die in real time. When they finally noticed her, Derek didn't even look embarrassed. He looked annoyed. "Tasha, we need to talk," he'd said, climbing out of bed with no shame at all. The conversation that followed was burned into Natasha's memory like a scar. Derek pulling on his pants, Amber wrapping herself in the sheet, and Natasha standing there in her scrubs, still carrying the faint smell of hospital antiseptic. "This isn't working," Derek had said. "You know it's not. We're not happy." "You're not happy," Natasha had corrected, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've been trying. I've been working to build our future." "Your future?" Derek had shot back. "Your career. Your dreams. What about me? What about what I need?" Amber gets it. She understands what it means to be a partner. "She's been screwing my husband in my bed," Natasha had said. "That's not being a partner. That's being a homewrecker." Amber had flinched at that, but Derek had stepped forward, aggressive. "Don't talk to her that way. This is your fault, Tasha. You were never here. You chose medicine over me every single time. What did you expect?" "I expected you to honor your vows," Natasha had replied. Derek had laughed. Vows. Right. Those vows where you promised to love and cherish me? When was the last time you had energy for me? When was the last time you looked at me the way you look at your patients? You treat strangers better than you treat your own husband. The argument had escalated. Amber had eventually fled to the bathroom. Derek had said things designed to hurt, and they did. He called Natasha boring. Obsessed. Cold. He said Amber made him feel alive in a way Natasha never had. He said he'd been planning to leave anyway. Natasha finding them just sped up the timeline. I want a divorce, he'd said finally. I'm done pretending this marriage is something it's not. Natasha had reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test. She'd held it up, the 2 pink lines clearly visible. I'm pregnant. Derek had stared at it for a long moment. Then he'd shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. Get rid of it or don't. Either way, I'm leaving. Those words had broken something inside Natasha. Not the affair. That was a betrayal, but betrayals could be understood in some clinical way. But the dismissal of their child, the casual cruelty of telling her to get rid of it, the complete absence of anything resembling remorse or care, that had shattered something fundamental. She'd left the house that night. Drove to her best friend Monica's apartment and collapsed. Monica, a fellow resident, had held her while she cried, helped her call a lawyer, made her tea she couldn't drink. The next weeks were a blur. Derek had moved fast, filing divorce papers immediately. His lawyer, expensive and ruthless, had argued that Natasha's demanding career had destroyed the marriage. They'd had a prenup from when they were both broke college students, so there wasn't much to fight over financially. Derek wanted a clean break, and his lawyer made sure he got it. Natasha had tried to focus on work, on her pregnancy, on anything that might help her survive. But the stress was enormous. She was working residency hours while processing the end of her marriage while trying to take care of the tiny life growing inside her. Her body was exhausted. Her mind was fractured. She felt like she was breaking apart. 8 weeks into the pregnancy, she woke up bleeding. The cramping started soon after. She'd driven herself to the hospital, called Monica from the parking lot, and by the time she got to the emergency room, she knew. The miscarriage was quick and clinical. The attending physician was kind but busy. These things happen, he'd said, especially under stress. Her body just couldn't sustain the pregnancy. She'd lost her baby in the same hospital where she dreamed of one day performing surgeries. Derek had been informed through lawyers. He'd sent a brief text, sorry to hear that. Hope you're okay. Let's keep the divorce proceedings moving. No flowers. No visit. No acknowledgement that they'd lost a child together. Just an eagerness to finalize the paperwork and move on with Amber. The divorce was final 3 months later. Derek married Amber 6 weeks after that in a destination wedding in the Bahamas that Natasha saw photos of on social media before she blocked him everywhere. Natasha had spent the following months in survival mode. She worked. She slept when her body forced her to. She avoided anything that reminded her of Derek or the life she'd lost. She stopped believing in happy endings. She focused on the only thing that made sense anymore, medicine. And then Dr. James Harrison, the head of the Cardiac Surgery Fellowship Program at Boston Medical, had seen her present at a surgical conference. He'd been impressed by her research, her technique, her steady hands. He'd offered her a spot in his program, and Natasha had taken it without hesitation. She'd moved across the country, leaving behind every memory of Derek and their failed marriage. Boston had saved her. The work was brutal, but it was meaningful. She was learning from the best, operating on the most complex cases, developing new techniques. She published papers. She won awards. She became known in cardiac surgery circles as someone to watch, brilliant, dedicated, innovative. And she'd met James. Not Dr. Harrison, the program director, but James, the man. He was 15 years older, divorced with grown kids, and he understood the demands of surgical life. He never made her feel guilty for her schedule. He celebrated her successes. He held her during the moments when the trauma of losing her baby came back in waves. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. James had been patient, never pushing, always supportive. When she got pregnant, 9 months into their relationship, they'd both been terrified and thrilled. This time she had a partner who showed up, who went to appointments, who talked about their future with genuine excitement. When Metro General offered Natasha the position of senior cardiac surgeon, James had encouraged her to take it despite knowing it meant moving again. He'd come with her, accepting a position in the same department. They were a team. Natasha had never told James about Derek. She'd mentioned being divorced, said the marriage hadn't worked out, and left it at that. James hadn't pushed for details. He trusted her to share what she wanted when she was ready. Now, sitting in the consultation room across from Derek, watching him struggle to form words, Natasha felt the full weight of those 3 years. She'd become someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who'd earned every credential after her name through sheer will and talent. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine and built something beautiful from the ruins. And Derek? Derek was the same. Older, yes. Slightly heavier, his face showing the stress of his condition. But essentially unchanged. Still arrogant. Still cruel. Still completely unaware of how his words and actions affected others. Until now. Natasha, he said again, his voice cracking slightly. I didn't know you were back in the city. I didn't know you were. Dr. Coleman, she corrected firmly. In this hospital, I'm Dr. Coleman. Now, let's discuss your valve replacement surgery, Mr. Patterson. Time is critical, as your condition is degenerating rapidly. She turned back to the monitor, all business, and began explaining the surgical procedure in detail. But inside, where Derek couldn't see, Natasha felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that she'd survived him. And that was enough. The first morning after Natasha discovered Derek's affair, she'd woken up on Monica's couch with swollen eyes and a numb heart. Monica had already left for her shift at the hospital, but she'd left coffee and a note. You're strong enough for this. I believe in you. Natasha hadn't felt strong. She'd felt destroyed. But she'd dragged herself to the shower, put on clean scrubs, and shown up for her shift because what else could she do? Patients needed her. Surgery schedules didn't care about personal crises. Life continued whether you were ready or not. That day, she'd assisted in an emergency cardiac surgery. A 50-year-old man, father of 3, had come in with acute myocardial infarction. The attending surgeon, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, had moved with practiced efficiency, and Natasha had followed her lead, her hands steady even when her world felt like it was collapsing. They'd saved the man's life. Afterward, in the scrub room, Dr. Rodriguez had looked at Natasha with knowing eyes. You okay? No, Natasha had answered honestly. But I will be. Good, Dr. Rodriguez had said, drying her hands. Because you were excellent in there. Whatever's happening in your personal life, don't let it steal your gift. Medicine will save you if you let it. Those words had become Natasha's lifeline. Medicine will save you if you let it. The divorce proceedings had been ugly but quick. Derek's lawyer had pushed hard, and Natasha had been too exhausted to fight over furniture and bank accounts that meant nothing anymore. She'd signed everything, taken her maiden name back legally, and focused on the only thing that mattered, her training. The miscarriage had come during her busiest rotation, trauma surgery. She'd lost the baby on a Tuesday morning and was back in the OR by Thursday. Too soon, Monica had said. Too fast, her body had protested. But Natasha couldn't stop. Stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking, and she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She'd thrown herself into work with an intensity that worried her friends but impressed her supervisors. She took extra shifts. She volunteered for the most complex cases. She studied every free moment she had. When she slept, she dreamed in medical terminology. When she woke, she went straight back to the hospital. 6 months after the divorce was final, Dr. Rodriguez had called her into her office. Natasha had expected criticism about her relentless schedule or maybe concern about her mental health. Instead, Dr. Rodriguez had handed her a folder. There's a cardiac surgery fellowship in Boston, she'd said. Dr. James Harrison runs the program. He's the best in the country. I sent him your research paper on minimally invasive valve replacement techniques, and he wants to meet you. Natasha had stared at the folder. Boston. 3,000 miles away from Derek, from this city, from every memory that haunted her. I don't know if I'm good enough, she'd admitted. You're better than good enough, Dr. Rodriguez had replied. You're exceptional and you're wasting yourself here being miserable. Go to Boston. Learn from Harrison. Become the surgeon you're meant to be. The interview with Dr. James Harrison had been intense. He was in his late 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He'd grilled her on her research, her technique, her approach to complex cases. He'd watched her hands as she talked, nodding when he saw their steadiness. You've had a rough year, he'd observed, and Natasha had tensed, wondering what he'd heard. Yes, she'd said simply. And yet your performance hasn't dropped. In fact, according to Dr. Rodriguez, you've become more focused, more dedicated. Why is that? Natasha had considered lying, offering some professional answer. Instead, she'd told him the truth. Because surgery is where I make sense. In the OR, everything is clear. There are problems with solutions. There are skills I can learn and master. There's meaning. Outside the OR. She trailed off. Outside the OR, life is messy, James had finished. I understand that. I've been there. He'd leaned back in his chair. I'm offering you a position in my program, Dr. Coleman. Fair warning. It's brutal. The hours are worse than residency. The cases are the most complex you'll ever see. I'll demand everything you have to give. But if you survive it, you'll be one of the best cardiac surgeons in the world. I'll survive it, Natasha had said. Yes, James had agreed, smiling slightly. I believe you will. Boston had been exactly what she needed. A fresh start in a city where no one knew her story. The fellowship program was everything James had promised. Exhausting, challenging, transformative. She'd worked alongside the best surgeons in the country, learning techniques that most doctors only read about in journals. James himself had been an exceptional teacher. Patient when she struggled, demanding when he knew she could do better, always pushing her to think deeper and move with more precision. He treated her like a colleague, not a subordinate, asking for her opinions during complex cases and actually listening to her ideas. The other fellows in the program were competitive but respectful. They were all brilliant, all driven, all fighting for the same future. Natasha had found friends among them, people who understood the obsession with excellence, who didn't judge her for choosing a 12-hour surgery over a dinner party. Her breakthrough had come during her second year. She'd been assisting James on a pediatric valve replacement, a 7-year-old girl born with a congenital defect. The standard approach wasn't working. The girl's heart was too small, the anatomy too complicated. James had been ready to close and try again in a few months when the girl was bigger. Wait, Natasha had said. What if we approach from a different angle? Through the apex instead of the atrium. Use a smaller instrument set. James had looked at her, then at the girl's tiny heart, then back at her. That's never been done before. Not on someone this small. But it could work, Natasha had insisted. The physics support it. The access would be cleaner. If it fails, she could die on the table. If we close now, she might not make it another few months. Her heart's deteriorating. James had studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. Talk me through it. Every step. Natasha had, and James had let her try. For 3 hours, she'd worked with instruments that felt too big for the delicate tissue, her hands moving with a precision she didn't know she possessed. James had guided her, advised her, but let her lead. And it had worked. The valve replacement was successful. The girl's heart had started beating stronger immediately. In the scrub room afterward, James had pulled off his mask and looked at her with something like pride. That was extraordinary, Natasha. That was the kind of innovation that changes medicine. I just thought. You thought outside the protocol, he'd interrupted. You saw a problem and created a solution. That's not something that can be taught. That's instinct combined with skill. That's genius. Natasha had felt something crack open inside her chest. For the first time since Derek, she'd felt like herself again. Not Derek's failed wife. Not the woman who couldn't hold her marriage or her pregnancy together. Just Dr. Natasha Coleman, cardiac surgeon, who just saved a 7-year-old girl's life with an innovative technique no one had tried before. She'd published a paper on the procedure. It had been accepted by the New England Journal of Medicine. Cardiac surgeons around the country started referencing her work. Conference invitations had arrived. Job offers had started coming in. And somewhere during her 3rd year, she'd noticed that her relationship with James had shifted. He'd always been supportive, but now he was something more. He brought her coffee during long cases. He asked about her life outside the hospital, actually cared about her answer. He made her laugh, which she'd almost forgotten how to do. The first time he'd asked her to dinner, she'd panicked. Dr. Harrison, I don't think. James, he'd corrected. Outside the hospital, I'm James. And I'm not asking as your program director. I'm asking as a man who's developed feelings for someone remarkable. That's complicated, she'd said. Everything worthwhile is complicated, he'd replied. But I'm patient. Think about it. No pressure. She'd thought about it for 2 weeks. During that time, she'd watched him more carefully. Noticed how kind he was with patients. How respectful he was with nurses and junior staff. How he never used his position to intimidate or demean. How he talked about his ex-wife with sadness but no bitterness. How he called his adult kids regularly and actually listened when they talked. He was nothing like Derek. So she'd said yes to dinner. Then yes to another. And slowly, carefully, she'd let herself trust again. James never pushed. Never demanded she sacrifice her career for him. Never made her feel guilty for choosing surgery. Instead, he celebrated her successes like they were his own. When the pregnancy test came back positive a year into their relationship, Natasha had sobbed in the bathroom. Terror, joy, grief for the baby she'd lost. Everything had crashed into her at once. She'd been afraid to tell James, afraid he'd react like Derek had. Instead, he'd held her and cried with her. "This is a gift," he'd whispered. "This is a second chance. And I'm going to be here for all of it. Every appointment. Every moment. I promise you." And he had been. When Metro General had contacted her with their offer, senior cardiac surgeon, youngest person ever appointed to the position, generous salary, state-of-the-art facilities, she'd been shocked. James had been proud. "This is your moment," he'd said. "Take it." "But the program? I'll find someone else brilliant to take my place. The program will survive. This opportunity won't wait." "Come with me," she'd said impulsively. "There might be positions available. We could both." "I'll start looking," he'd agreed immediately. "If you're going, I'm going. We're a team." Metro General had been happy to take James on staff as well, and just like that, they'd been moving back to the city where Natasha's life had fallen apart. She'd felt some trepidation. What if she ran into Derek? But the city was large and the chances seemed small. Besides, she was different now. Stronger. She saw him, she could handle it. She just hadn't expected to see him like this. Hadn't expected him to humiliate her without even recognizing her. Hadn't expected to be the one person standing between him and death. The universe had a strange sense of justice. As Natasha prepared for bed in her apartment that night after the consultation with Derek, James wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her belly. "Rough day?" he asked. "You could say that," Natasha replied. She hadn't told him about Derek yet. She would, but not tonight. Tonight she just wanted to feel safe. "You're amazing," James said softly. "Just in case no one told you today." Natasha turned in his arms and kissed him. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being you. For being here. For being nothing like—" She stopped. "Nothing like your ex?" James guessed. "Nothing like him," she confirmed. "Good," James said. "Because you deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are. Who knows how lucky he is. Who would never, ever take you for granted." Natasha rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady and sure. She'd survived Derek. She'd built a life beyond him. She'd become someone she was proud of. And soon she'd walk into an operating room and save his life, not because he deserved it, but because she was a healer. Because every life mattered. Because that's who she was. Derek would live because of her skill. And then she'd walk away from him forever, leaving him to spend the rest of his saved life knowing he'd thrown away something precious. That was a revenge better than anything else she could imagine. The morning after the initial consultation, Derek Patterson couldn't sleep. He lay in his expensive king-sized bed next to Amber, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the hospital. Every word he'd said. Every cruel joke. Every mocking gesture. All of it directed at Natasha, pregnant, successful, accomplished Natasha, who now held his life in her hands. Amber stirred beside him. "You're still awake?" "I can't stop thinking about it," Derek admitted. "About the surgery?" "About her. About what I said." He turned to look at his wife. Amber was pretty in a conventional way, blonde and petite, younger than him by several years. She'd been so exciting when they first got together, so different from Natasha's seriousness. Now looking at her, Derek felt only a hollow ache. "I didn't recognize her." "It's been 3 years," Amber said defensively. "People change. She's a senior cardiac surgeon. She's pregnant. She's engaged to someone." Derek's voice cracked. "She became everything she said she would, and I—" He trailed off. "And you what?" Amber's tone had an edge now. "You moved on. You built a life with me. You have a successful business. Why are you so focused on your ex-wife?" "Because she's going to be cutting into my chest," Derek snapped. "Because I spent 10 minutes yesterday insulting her in front of her colleagues, calling her incompetent and unfit, and now my life depends on her skill." Amber was quiet for a moment. "Can you request a different surgeon?" "I already asked." The hospital administrator was very clear. "Dr. Coleman is the best cardiac surgeon they have. My insurance requires I use their top specialist for this type of procedure. And apparently she's the only one in the region who successfully performed this particular valve replacement technique more than a dozen times. So she has to do the surgery?" Unless I want to wait months to find another qualified surgeon, which my heart can't afford, then yes. She has to do it. Derek sat up, running his hands through his hair. Amber, you don't understand. I destroyed her. I cheated on her, divorced her, and moved on like she meant nothing. And yesterday, I mocked her for being pregnant, said she was incompetent, implied she shouldn't be working. I was cruel. Really cruel. You didn't know it was her, Amber tried to defend him. Does that make it better? Derek challenged. That I'm willing to mock and demean a pregnant woman as long as I don't personally know her? What does that say about me? Amber didn't have an answer for that. Derek's preoperative appointment was scheduled for 9 o'clock. The hospital required several tests, final consultations, and paperwork before the surgery, which was set for later that week. Derek arrived early, hoping to somehow fix the situation before he was too deep to escape. The cardiac wing looked different in morning light. Bright, clean, efficient. Nurses moved with purpose. Patients in wheelchairs were guided carefully down corridors. Medical equipment hummed with life-saving technology. This was Natasha's world now, and she commanded it with obvious respect from everyone around her. Rita at the nurse's station looked up when Derek approached. Her expression was polite but cool. Mr. Patterson, Dr. Coleman will be with you shortly. Please have a seat. Listen, Derek started, lowering his voice. About yesterday. Mr. Patterson, Rita interrupted smoothly, Dr. Coleman is a professional. Your past relationship with her won't affect your care. I suggest you focus on your health and let her do her job. Derek wanted to argue, to explain, to somehow make this woman understand that he wasn't a complete monster. But Rita had already turned back to her computer, dismissing him effectively. He sat in the waiting area watching the hallway. Several doctors passed by, including a tall man with silver-shot dark hair who moved with the confidence of someone important. The man paused at the nurse's station, speaking briefly with Rita, who smiled warmly at him. Then he continued down the hall, disappearing into an office. That's Dr. Harrison, a voice said beside Derek. An elderly man in a hospital gown sat in the next chair, his arm in a sling. He's one of the best cardiac surgeons in the country. Trained Dr. Coleman herself. They work together now. Dr. Coleman and Dr. Harrison? Derek asked. Yeah, the man continued, happy to talk. They're engaged, you know. There's a ring and everything. My wife saw it when Dr. Coleman examined me last week. Beautiful sapphire. Dr. Harrison seems like a good man. Very attentive to her. Brought her lunch yesterday during her break. My wife thought it was sweet. Derek felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with his failing valve. Dr. James Harrison. The James Harrison who'd trained her. Who'd brought her lunch. Who'd put a sapphire ring on her finger. Who was the father of her baby. How long have they been together? Derek heard himself ask. Not sure exactly, the elderly man replied. But they moved here from Boston together when she took the senior position. That's commitment, right? Following your woman across the country. Following your woman across the country. Derek had let her go without a fight. Had been relieved when she moved away, making the divorce easier, erasing her presence from his life. Mr. Patterson? A young nurse approached. Dr. Coleman is ready for you. She's in examination room 2. Derek stood on unsteady legs and followed the nurse down the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. The nurse opened a door and gestured him inside. The examination room was standard. Medical equipment, a paper-covered table, posters about heart health on the walls. And Natasha, sitting on a stool with a tablet, wearing a white coat over her scrubs, her pregnant belly now impossible to miss in the bright overhead light. She looked up when he entered. Good morning, Mr. Patterson. Please have a seat. The nurse closed the door, leaving them alone. Derek sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Natasha, Derek started. Dr. Coleman, she corrected again, her voice firm but not unkind. In this hospital, we maintain professional boundaries. It's better that way. Right. Dr. Coleman. Derek swallowed hard. About yesterday, I need to apologize. I said terrible things. I didn't know it was you, but that's not an excuse. I shouldn't have spoken about anyone that way. I was rude and unprofessional and... You were yourself, Natasha interrupted calmly. That's who you were yesterday, and that's who you've always been. Let's not pretend this is new behavior, Mr. Patterson. The words hit like a physical blow. Derek opened his mouth to defend himself, but what could he say? She was right. He'd always been dismissive of people he considered beneath him. He'd always been quick to judge and mock. He treated her that way during their marriage, making her feel small for her exhaustion, for her dedication to medicine, for not prioritizing his needs above everything else. I'm going to be very clear with you, Natasha continued, standing up and approaching him with a stethoscope. Your surgery is scheduled for Thursday morning at 6. It will take approximately 4 to 6 hours, depending on complications. Your heart is in worse shape than initial scans showed, which means the risk is higher than we first discussed. There's about a 15% chance you won't survive the procedure. Derek's blood ran cold. 15%? Yes. Natasha pressed the stethoscope to his chest, listening intently. Her face was impassive, focused entirely on his heartbeat. After a moment she stepped back. Your heart is struggling. The damaged valve is causing fluid backup into your lungs. You're probably experiencing shortness of breath, fatigue, occasional chest pain. All of that will get worse without intervention. Within 3 weeks, maybe 4, you'll experience complete heart failure. That's a death sentence. And with the surgery? With the surgery, if you survive the initial procedure, you have an 85% chance of full recovery. You'll need to make lifestyle changes, diet, exercise, stress management. But you could live another 30 or 40 years. Derek looked at her face, searching for any sign of emotion. Anger, satisfaction, revenge, anything that might indicate she was planning to let him die on the operating table. He found nothing. She was completely professional, her expression neutral, her voice clinical. Will you? He couldn't finish the sentence. Natasha's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something. Not anger. Something colder and more definitive. Will I what, Mr. Patterson? Will I save your life? That's my job. That's what I do. Every patient who comes to my operating room receives the absolute best care I can provide, regardless of who they are or what they've done. That includes you. Why? The question escaped before Derek could stop it. After everything I did to you, why would you? Because I'm not you, Natasha said simply. I don't make decisions based on personal feelings when someone's life is at stake. I took an oath. I spent years learning how to be excellent at this. I don't throw that away because of history. She returned to her stool, making notes on her tablet. You're going to live, Mr. Patterson, because I'm very good at my job. Not because I forgive you. Not because I've forgotten what you did. But because saving lives is who I am, and I won't let you change that. Derek felt tears pricking his eyes. I'm sorry. For everything. For the affair, for how I ended things, for what I said about the baby. Stop. Natasha's voice was sharp now. I don't want your apologies. They mean nothing to me. What's done is done. We both moved on. You have your life with Amber. I have mine with James. That's how this ends. Does he know? Derek asked. Dr. Harrison. Does he know about us? He knows I was married before. That's all he needs to know. Natasha stood up, signaling the end of the examination. Your pre-op test will be conducted this afternoon. Follow the nurse's instructions about fasting before the surgery. Don't eat or drink anything after midnight Wednesday. Arrive at the hospital by 5 Thursday morning. Bring someone to drive you home when you're discharged. Natasha, please. Dr. Coleman, she corrected one final time. And this conversation is over. I'll see you Thursday morning, Mr. Patterson. Try not to stress too much. It's bad for your heart. She left the room, her white coat swishing behind her, and Derek was alone with the sound of medical equipment and his own ragged breathing. The nurse returned moments later to lead him to the testing area, and Derek followed numbly, his mind reeling. She was going to save him. Despite everything, she was going to save his life. And somehow that felt worse than if she'd refused. It meant she was better than him in every possible way. It meant his cruelty hadn't destroyed her. It meant she'd won not through revenge but through simply being exceptional. That afternoon, while Derek underwent stress tests and blood work, Natasha sat in the hospital cafeteria with James. He'd brought her a fruit salad and herbal tea, insisting she needed to eat something healthy. You're quiet today, James observed. Everything okay? Natasha took a sip of tea, considering how much to tell him. Remember how I mentioned being divorced? Yes. My ex-husband is here. He's my patient. The valve replacement on Thursday. James set down his fork. What? Derek Patterson. That's his name. We were married for 5 years. He had an affair, divorced me, I lost our baby from the stress, and I moved to Boston to escape it all. The words came out flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a medical chart. Yesterday, he humiliated me in the hospital corridor before realizing who I was. Today, I examined him and confirmed his surgery schedule. Natasha, James reached across the table, taking her hand. This is huge. You should transfer the case. Let someone else handle it. No. Why not? Because I'm the best chance he has of survival, Natasha said simply. And because if I transfer the case, it means he still has power over me. It means I'm still affected by what he did. I'm not. I survived him, James. I became someone better. I'm not going to let him disrupt my life again by forcing me to avoid difficult cases. James studied her face. You're sure about this? Completely sure. Natasha squeezed his hand. He's just another patient. A patient with a damaged valve who needs surgery. That's all he is to me now. Okay, James said slowly. But I'm scrubbing in with you. As your assistant. Non-negotiable. James? I'm not questioning your ability, he interrupted gently. I'm saying you shouldn't have to do this alone. I want to be there. For support. For backup. Because I love you, and this is a difficult situation no matter how professional you are. Natasha felt warmth spread through her chest. This was what partnership looked like. Not Derek's demands and criticisms, but James's quiet support and respect. Thank you, she said softly. Always, James replied. Now eat your fruit salad. Our daughter needs nutrition. Natasha smiled, a real smile for the first time all day. Our daughter? I have a feeling, James said. Call it surgical intuition. They finished lunch together, talking about baby names and nursery colors, and for those few moments, Derek Patterson didn't exist. He was just a patient on her schedule. Nothing more. Nothing less. But as Natasha returned to her rounds that afternoon, she knew Thursday morning would be one of the most challenging surgeries of her career. Not because of the technical difficulty, though that was substantial, but because every cut she made, every stitch she placed, every decision she executed would be watched by the man who'd once told her she'd never be enough. And she'd prove him wrong with every beat of his repaired heart. Wednesday evening, Natasha sat in her home office reviewing Derek's surgical plan for the 10th time. James had already gone to bed, encouraging her to do the same, but she couldn't. Not yet. This surgery was too important, not for Derek but for her. She needed it to be perfect. The procedure was complex. Derek's mitral valve was severely damaged, requiring complete replacement with a mechanical valve. But his heart muscle was also weakened, making the surgery riskier. She'd need to work quickly to minimize time on the bypass machine, but carefully enough to ensure perfect placement. Any mistake could result in leakage, infection, or cardiac arrest. She performed this surgery successfully 23 times. She knew every step, every potential complication, every backup plan. But this time felt different. This time, the person on her table would be someone who'd hurt her deeply. Someone she'd loved once. Someone who'd made her feel worthless. And she had to save him anyway. Her phone buzzed. A text from Monica, her friend from residency who still lived across the country. Monica, heard through the medical grapevine that you're operating on your ex tomorrow. You okay? Natasha smiled. Medical communities were small worlds. News traveled fast. Natasha, I'm fine. Just another surgery. Monica, liar. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to feel conflicted. You're human. Natasha, I know. But I can't let him see that. I can't give him that power. Monica, you don't have to be superhuman, Tasha. You just have to be you. And you're already extraordinary. Natasha set down her phone, feeling tears prick her eyes. She was tired. So tired of being strong, of pretending Derek's presence didn't affect her, of acting like seeing him again hadn't reopened old wounds she thought had healed. But she couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when a patient's life depended on her steady hands and clear mind. She closed her laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed. James stirred when she slipped under the covers, automatically reaching for her in his sleep. She curled against him, letting his warmth and steady breathing calm her racing thoughts. Tomorrow she'd prove who she'd become. Tomorrow she'd show Derek that he hadn't broken her. Tomorrow she'd save his life and walk away stronger than ever. She fell asleep with her hand on her belly, feeling their baby move gently beneath her palm. Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. Natasha woke at 4, unable to sleep longer despite her exhaustion. She showered, dressed in comfortable scrubs, and ate a light breakfast while James made her tea. Ready? He asked, studying her face. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. They drove to the hospital together in comfortable silence. James didn't try to fill the quiet with empty reassurances. He just held her hand across the center console, his grip steady and sure. The hospital was already busy when they arrived, the pre-dawn shift change filling the corridors with activity. Natasha went straight to the surgical prep area, reviewing Derek's charts one final time while James checked the OR setup. Derek was scheduled to arrive at 5. At 4:55, the pre-op nurses wheeled him in on a gurney. He looked terrified, his face pale, his hands gripping the gurney rails. Amber walked beside him, her own face tight with worry. Natasha stepped into the pre-op bay, her team behind her. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson. How are you feeling?" "Scared," Derek admitted, his voice shaking. "Terrified, actually." "That's normal," Natasha said calmly. "Fear is your body's way of acknowledging something important is happening. Let me introduce you to the team. This is Dr. Harrison, my fellow cardiac surgeon who will be assisting. These are nurses Jordan and Patricia, who will be in the OR throughout the procedure. Our anesthesiologist, Dr. Kim, will be putting you under and monitoring you during surgery." Each person nodded as they were introduced. Derek's eyes lingered on James, perhaps recognizing him from the hospital corridor, perhaps understanding this was the man who'd replaced him in Natasha's life. "We're going to take excellent care of you," James said warmly. "Dr. Coleman is the best I've ever worked with. You're in outstanding hands." Derek looked back at Natasha. Can we talk? Just for a minute. Alone." Natasha hesitated, then nodded. 2 minutes. Then we need to prep you." She gestured for the team to give them space, though they remained close by, respecting patient privacy while staying alert. Once they were relatively alone, Derek spoke quickly, urgently. "I need to say this before I go under. In case I don't wake up. I'm sorry. For everything. For cheating on you. For ending things the way I did. For what I said about the baby. I was cruel and selfish and you deserved so much better. You always deserved better." Natasha regarded him silently for a moment. "You're not going to die today, Mr. Patterson. I won't let you. Not because I've forgiven you, but because you deserve to live with the consequences of your choices. You deserve to spend the rest of your life knowing you threw away something real for something temporary." "Amber and I don't care about Amber," Natasha interrupted. "I don't care about your marriage or your life or your regrets. What I care about is that you walk out of this hospital healthy so you can never, ever say that I was less than exceptional. That's my revenge, Mr. Patterson. Not your death. Your survival. Your complete recovery. Every beat of your repaired heart will remind you that I saved you when I could have walked away." Derek stared at her, speechless. "Now," Natasha continued briskly, "let's go over the consent forms one more time. You understand the risks? Heart attack, stroke, infection, bleeding, death." "Yes," Derek whispered. "And you consent to Dr. Harrison and myself performing the surgery?" "Yes." "Good." Natasha nodded to the team. "Let's move him to OR." The next hours blurred into practiced routine. Derek was transferred to the operating table. Dr. Kim administered anesthesia. The surgical field was prepped, sterile drapes positioned. Lights were adjusted. Instruments were laid out with precision. Music played softly in the background. Natasha preferred classical during complex surgeries, finding the rhythm helped her focus. "Scalpel," Natasha said, her voice steady. The first incision was clean, practiced. She'd done this so many times that her hands moved almost independently of conscious thought. But this time was different. This time, every movement carried the weight of history. James worked opposite her, anticipating her needs with the ease of long practice. They'd performed dozens of surgeries together. They moved like dancers who'd perfected their choreography. "Bypass machine ready," one of the nurses called. "Good," Natasha replied. "Let's get him on bypass." The heart-lung machine took over Derek's circulatory system, keeping his blood oxygenated while his heart was stopped. Natasha worked with focused intensity, isolating the damaged valve, carefully removing it, preparing for the replacement. "Valve ready," James said. "Let's place it," Natasha directed. This was the critical moment. The mechanical valve had to be positioned perfectly, sutured with absolute precision. Any misalignment would cause leakage. Any loose stitch could result in detachment. This was where her skill mattered most. Natasha's hands moved with practiced grace, placing each stitch with meticulous care. She could feel the team watching, the weight of their attention. But she blocked it out, focused entirely on the task. This was just tissue and mechanical parts. This was just anatomy and technique. This wasn't personal. Except it was. On her table was the man who'd destroyed her once. The man who'd made her feel small and worthless. The man who'd abandoned her when she needed him most. And she held his life in her hands. One stitch at a time she proved she was better than his cruelty. One stitch at a time she showed herself she'd survived. One stitch at a time she won. "Valve is secure," she announced after what felt like hours. "Let's test it." They slowly restarted Derek's heart, watching carefully as blood began flowing through the new valve. It worked perfectly. No leakage. No irregularities. Just a strong, steady heartbeat that would keep him alive for decades. "Beautiful work," James said quietly. Natasha nodded, already moving to close. She worked with the same meticulous care, ensuring every layer was properly repaired, every stitch placed for optimal healing. She was thorough, precise, refusing to rush despite the hours already spent. Finally, it was done. Derek's chest was closed, bandaged, ready for recovery. "Time?" Natasha asked. 6 hours, 14 minutes, Dr. Kim reported. "Good. Let's get him to recovery." Natasha stepped back from the table, pulling off her gloves. "Excellent work, everyone. Thank you." As the nurses wheeled Derek to the ICU, Natasha walked to the scrub room. James followed, closing the door behind them. "That was extraordinary," he said. "Even for you, that was exceptional." Natasha scrubbed her hands slowly, methodically, watching pink-tinged water swirl down the drain. "I needed it to be perfect." It was more than perfect. It was art. James came up behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," Natasha admitted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "I just saved the life of a man who destroyed mine. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." "There's no supposed to," James said gently. "Whatever you feel is valid." Natasha dried her hands, turning to face him. "I feel empty. Like I expected this to matter more. To feel like triumph or revenge or something. But it just feels like another surgery." "Maybe that's the real victory," James suggested. "That he's just another patient to you now. That he doesn't have power over your emotions anymore." Natasha considered that. Maybe James was right. Maybe the fact that she felt nothing was the truest sign she'd moved past Derek completely. "Come on," James said. "You need to eat something. And then you need to update his family." "Right, Amber." Natasha had almost forgotten about Derek's wife. In the surgical waiting room, Amber sat alone, her face streaked with old tears, her hands twisting a tissue. She looked up when Natasha entered, hope and fear warring in her expression. "How is he?" Amber asked immediately. "The surgery was successful," Natasha said professionally. "The valve replacement went very well. He'll be in ICU for the next 24 hours for monitoring, then moved to a regular recovery room. If there are no complications, he should be discharged in 4 to 5 days." Amber burst into tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I know. I know things between you and Derek are complicated. But thank you for saving him." Natasha felt a flicker of something, not quite pity but understanding. Amber was young, probably not much older than Natasha had been when she married Derek. Young and naive enough to believe Derek when he said his marriage had been loveless, that Natasha was cold and career-obsessed, that he'd been trapped and unfulfilled. "You're welcome," Natasha said simply. "A nurse will come get you when he's awake enough for visitors. He'll be groggy from anesthesia, so don't expect him to make much sense at first." "Can I ask you something?" Amber said suddenly. Did you want him to die? On the table?" The question hung in the air between them. Natasha could have lied, said of course not, maintained the professional facade. Instead, she answered honestly. "No," she said. "I wanted him to live. I wanted him to wake up and recover fully and have decades of life ahead of him. Because every day he lives, he'll know that I saved him. That the woman he threw away became someone excellent enough to hold his life in her hands. That's worth more than his death ever could be." Amber stared at her, understanding slowly dawning. "You won." "We both won," Natasha corrected. "I got the career and life I always wanted. You got Derek. Everyone got what they deserved." She left before Amber could respond, walking back through the hospital corridors to her office. James was waiting there with food and sympathy, and together they sat in comfortable silence while Natasha processed the morning. Derek would live. He'd recover. He'd go home with Amber and return to his real estate company and his comfortable life. And Natasha would continue being Dr. Coleman, saving lives, teaching residents, preparing for her daughter's birth. Their paths had crossed one final time, and now they'd diverge forever. That felt right. That felt like closure. In the ICU, Derek woke slowly, his chest aching, machines beeping around him. The first face he saw was a nurse checking his vitals. The second was Amber's, relieved and tear-stained. But the face he couldn't stop thinking about was Natasha's. Her steady hands. Her brilliant skill. Her complete professionalism despite everything he'd done. She'd saved him. And somehow that hurt worse than dying ever could. Derek spent 3 days in the ICU, his body adjusting to the new mechanical valve clicking steadily in his chest. Every beat was a reminder. Every mechanical tick-tick-tick was Natasha's skill keeping him alive. He found himself touching his chest constantly, feeling the bandages, the surgical tape, the proof that she'd cut him open and fixed what was broken. Physically broken anyway. The rest of him remained a mess. Amber visited constantly, bringing magazines he didn't read, talking about their house, his business, plans for when he got home. Derek nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept watching the ICU entrance, waiting for Natasha to appear on rounds. She came twice daily, always with an entourage of residents and nurses. She'd check his vitals, review his charts, ask clinical questions about pain levels and breathing, and move on. She never stayed long. She never made eye contact longer than necessary. She treated him exactly like every other patient, with competent care and complete emotional distance. Dr. Harrison, James, Derek had learned his name was James, accompanied her each time. He was attentive to Derek as a patient but more attentive to Natasha, his hand occasionally touching her lower back, guiding her when she looked tired, carrying her tablet when her arms were full. They moved together with easy familiarity, the kind that came from deep trust and genuine affection. Derek had never looked at Natasha that way during their marriage. He realized that now, watching James's careful attention. Derek had looked at Natasha as an obligation, a wife who was supposed to meet certain expectations and repeatedly failed to do so. James looked at her like she was extraordinary and he was grateful for every moment with her. On the third day, Derek was moved to a regular recovery room. The shift felt significant, out of critical care, on the path to actual healing. Amber had gone home to shower and change clothes, promising to return soon, leaving Derek alone for the first time since the surgery. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting a nurse. Instead, Natasha entered, alone this time, carrying his discharge paperwork. She looked tired, he noticed. Her pregnancy was showing more now, her belly prominent beneath her white coat. But she moved with the same confident grace he remembered from years ago. "Good afternoon, Mr. Patterson," she said, pulling a chair close to his bed. "We need to discuss your discharge plan." "Where's Dr. Harrison?" Derek asked. "With another patient." Natasha opened the folder. "Your recovery is progressing well. Heart function is strong. The valve is performing perfectly. We'll discharge you tomorrow morning. You'll need to follow up with your regular cardiologist in 1 week, then 2 weeks, then monthly for the first 6 months." She launched into explanations of medication schedules, dietary restrictions, exercise limitations, warning signs of complications. Derek tried to focus, but he couldn't stop staring at her face, searching for any sign of the young woman he'd married. She was there, in the shape of her eyes and the curve of her smile when she explained something complex, but she was also completely different. Stronger. More assured. More herself than she'd ever been with him. "Are you listening, Mr. Patterson?" Natasha asked, a hint of impatience in her tone. "Why did you become a cardiac surgeon?" The question escaped before Derek could think better of it. Natasha set down the paperwork. "That's not relevant to your discharge plan. Please. I need to understand." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Because hearts are logical. They have systems and rhythms. They can be fixed with skill and knowledge. They made sense when nothing else in my life did." She picked up the folder again. "Now, about your medications. When did you find out you were pregnant?" Derek interrupted again. With our baby. The one we lost." Natasha's hand stilled on the paperwork. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "The day I came home and found you with Amber. I'd bought a pregnancy test on the way home. I was going to make your favorite dinner and tell you. I had tiny baby shoes in my purse to surprise you with." Derek felt like he'd been punched. "Tasha. Dr. Coleman," she corrected automatically. "And that's not a conversation we're having. That was 3 years ago. It's done." "I told you to get rid of it," Derek whispered, the memory sharp and shameful. "I said it wasn't my problem." "How could I have said that?" "Because that's who you were. Maybe that's still who you are." Natasha stood up, gathering the paperwork. "I'll have a nurse go over the discharge instructions again. Make sure you actually listen this time. Your life depends on following the protocol." I'm sorry, Derek said desperately. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, Natasha replied. Now that you've seen what I became without you. Now that you need me. But you weren't sorry when it mattered. You weren't sorry when I was crying in our apartment, when I was bleeding out our baby in a hospital bed, when I was trying to rebuild my life from nothing. She moved toward the door. Your apologies are 3 years too late, Mr. Patterson. And frankly, I don't need them. I made peace with what happened. I suggest you do the same. She left, and Derek was alone again with the steady tick-tick-tick of his mechanical heart. That night, Amber returned with dinner from his favorite restaurant. She chattered about their house, about work, about the vacation they should plan once he'd recovered. Derek ate mechanically, responding when required, his mind elsewhere. You're quiet, Amber observed. I'm tired, Derek lied. The surgery was a success. You're going to be fine. We can get back to normal soon. Amber reached across the bed to take his hand. I was so scared, Derek. I thought I might lose you. Would that have been so terrible? Derek asked, and immediately regretted it when Amber's face crumpled. How can you say that? Of course it would have been terrible. I love you. Do you? Derek challenged. Or do you love the lifestyle? The house, the money, the status? That's not fair, Amber protested, tears forming. Yes, those things are nice, but that's not why I'm with you. Why are you with me? Derek pressed. Really? What do you see in me besides the comfortable life I can provide? Amber pulled her hand back, hurt and confused. You're upset. You're recovering from major surgery. You don't mean this. Maybe I do, Derek said. Maybe I'm finally seeing things clearly. I destroyed a good woman for you, Amber. I threw away a marriage to someone who actually loved me, who supported me when I had nothing, who believed in me. And for what? For excitement? For youth? For ego? You told me your marriage was dead, Amber said, her voice shaking. You said you and Natasha had nothing in common, that she was cold and distant, that you'd been unhappy for years. I lied, Derek admitted. Or maybe I convinced myself it was true because it was easier than admitting I was bored and selfish. Natasha wasn't cold. She was exhausted from working herself to death while supporting my dreams. She wasn't distant. She was focused on becoming excellent at something that mattered. And I resented her for it. Why are you telling me this now? Amber demanded. Because she saved my life, Derek said. The woman I betrayed, whose baby I dismissed, who I left broken and alone, she spent 6 hours in surgery making sure I survived. She could have let me die. She had every right to. But she didn't because she's better than I ever deserved. Amber stood up, her own face pale. So what are you saying? You want her back? No, Derek said tiredly. She doesn't want me. She made that very clear. She has someone better. Someone who treats her the way I should have. I'm just saying I'm finally seeing the truth. And it's ugly. Amber grabbed her purse. I'm going home. You're clearly not in the right headspace for company. I'll pick you up tomorrow when they discharge you. After she left, Derek lay in the dark, listening to his artificial heart tick. Somewhere in this hospital, Natasha was probably finishing her shift, going home to James, planning for their baby. Living the life Derek could have shared if he hadn't been so spectacularly stupid. He'd survived the surgery just like she'd promised. But he wasn't sure he'd survive knowing what he'd lost. The next morning, Natasha did morning rounds with her residents. They stopped at Derek's room last. She knocked perfunctorily and entered with 5 young doctors trailing behind her. Good morning, Mr. Patterson. I'm pleased to report you're being discharged today. How are you feeling? Physically better, Derek said. Otherwise not great. Natasha consulted his chart, not acknowledging the personal comment. Your vitals are excellent. Heart rhythm is strong and regular. The valve is functioning perfectly. You'll have some discomfort for a few weeks as you heal, but that's normal. She turned to her residents. This patient underwent mitral valve replacement 3 days ago. What are the primary concerns during the first week of recovery? A young resident stepped forward. Infection, bleeding, arrhythmia, and blood clot formation. Correct. Mr. Patterson is on anticoagulants to prevent clots. He'll need regular blood tests to ensure proper dosing. She looked back at Derek. You received all the discharge paperwork? Yes. Good. Follow it carefully. Don't overexert yourself. No driving for 2 weeks. No lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds for 6 weeks. Take all medications as prescribed. Watch for fever, chest pain, or shortness of breath, and call your cardiologist immediately if you experience any of those symptoms. Dr. Coleman, one of the residents asked, what was the most challenging aspect of this particular surgery? Natasha considered the question. The valve damage was more extensive than scans indicated. We had to modify our approach intraoperatively. That's why preoperative preparation is crucial, but you also have to be ready to adapt when conditions aren't what you expected. She caught Derek's eye briefly, and he wondered if she was talking about more than just surgery. Life required adaptation when conditions weren't what you expected. She'd certainly proven that. Any questions, Mr. Patterson? She asked. Will I see you again? For follow-up? No. Your regular cardiologist will handle ongoing care. If complications arise that require surgical intervention, you can be referred back to this department, but we hope that won't be necessary. She offered a professional smile. You were an excellent patient, Mr. Patterson. I wish you well. Sounded like goodbye. Final. Complete. Derek realized this was it, the last time he'd see her. She'd drift back to her world of surgeries and research and teaching, and he'd return to his world of real estate and Amber and the comfortable life that suddenly felt hollow. Thank you, he said inadequately. For everything. Natasha nodded and turned to her residents. Let's move on. They filed out, white coats swishing, voices already discussing the next case. Derek watched them go, watched Natasha's silhouette disappear down the corridor, and felt the finality settle over him like a weight. She'd saved his life and then walked away, leaving him to live with the consequences of his choices. Just like she'd promised. 2 weeks after discharge, Derek sat in his cardiologist's office for his first follow-up appointment. Dr. Morrison, a pleasant man in his 50s, reviewed Derek's recovery with satisfaction. Heart function is excellent, Dr. Morrison reported. The valve is working beautifully. Dr. Coleman did exceptional work. You're very lucky to have had her as your surgeon. I know, Derek said quietly. Any questions about your medications? Any problems with the anticoagulants? No, everything's fine. Dr. Morrison studied him. You seem depressed, Mr. Patterson. That's not uncommon after cardiac surgery. Some patients experience anxiety or mood changes. If you'd like, I can refer you to a therapist who specializes in post-surgical recovery. It's not the surgery, Derek said. Then, because Dr. Morrison seemed genuinely concerned, he added, Dr. Coleman is my ex-wife. We divorced 3 years ago. Finding out she was my surgeon was complicated. Ah, Dr. Morrison said, understanding dawning. That must have been difficult. I didn't recognize her when I first arrived at the hospital, Derek continued, needing suddenly to tell someone. I said terrible things about her before I knew who she was. Then I had to trust her to save my life. And she did. Even though I didn't deserve it. Medicine isn't about deserving, Dr. Morrison said gently. It's about healing whoever needs help. Dr. Coleman understands that. She's one of the finest surgeons I've worked with in my 30 years of practice. You were in excellent hands regardless of your history. Derek knew that was true. But it didn't make the guilt easier to bear. At home, things with Amber had become strained. She was trying to be supportive, but Derek couldn't shake the melancholy that had settled over him since the surgery. He went through the motions, working from home on business calls, reviewing development projects, meeting with his partners, but his heart wasn't in it. Literally and figuratively. Maybe we should take a vacation, Amber suggested one evening. Once your doctor clears you to travel. Somewhere tropical. We could relax. Maybe, Derek said noncommittally. Or we could start trying for a baby, Amber continued. We've talked about it before. This whole experience made me realize life is short. We should start building our family. Derek felt his chest tighten. A baby with Amber. The thought made him feel nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, no joy. Just a hollow acknowledgement that it would be expected, normal, the next step in their married life. But he kept thinking about Natasha's pregnant belly. About how happy she'd looked despite being tired from work. About how James looked at her like she was precious. About the family they were building together. A family Derek could have had if he hadn't been so blind and selfish. Let's wait, he said. Until I'm fully recovered. Amber's face fell, but she nodded. Okay. We have time. Did they though? Derek was 38 now. Amber was 31. They had time technically, but Derek couldn't shake the feeling that he'd already wasted too much of his life chasing the wrong things. He started Googling Natasha obsessively. Found articles about her research, interviews in medical journals, conference presentations. There was a news piece from when Metro General announced her appointment as senior cardiac surgeon. She looked confident in the photo, standing in front of the hospital, her hand resting on her still flat belly. The article mentioned Dr. James Harrison's appointment to the cardiac department as well, though it didn't explicitly state they were together. Derek found himself reading about James too. Graduated top of his class from Johns Hopkins. Published hundreds of papers. Trained an entire generation of cardiac surgeons. Widowed young, raised 2 children alone while building his career. By all accounts, a brilliant surgeon and a devoted father. He was everything Derek wasn't. Accomplished, dedicated, selfless. No wonder Natasha loved him. One afternoon, Derek drove past Metro General, telling himself he was just in the area. He sat in his car in the parking lot, watching the entrance. After an hour, he saw them, Natasha and James, leaving together at the end of what was probably a long shift. James carried both their bags. Natasha walked slowly, her hand on her very pregnant belly. James said something that made her laugh, and Derek saw her face light up in a way he'd never seen during their marriage. They got into a car together, James holding the door for her, waiting until she was settled before closing it gently. Such a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about how he treated her. With care. With consideration. With love. Derek drove home feeling more hollow than ever. That weekend, his business partner Gerald invited Derek and Amber to a charity dinner. It was for a medical foundation that funded cardiac research. Derek almost declined, but Amber insisted they needed to get out, needed to return to normal. The event was at a downtown hotel, elegant and crowded with the city's wealthy elite. Derek wore a tuxedo that felt too tight despite being the same size he'd worn before surgery. Amber looked beautiful in a silver dress, playing the role of supportive wife with practiced ease. They'd been there 20 minutes when Derek saw them. Natasha and James across the room talking with a group of donors. Natasha wore a deep blue maternity gown that somehow made her look both elegant and powerful. Her belly was very prominent now. She was probably 8 months along. James stood close to her, his hand on her lower back, protective and proud. "Let's go say hello," Amber said, noticing Derek's fixed stare. "No, let's not." But Amber was already moving, drawing Derek along. They crossed the room, and suddenly they were standing in front of the couple that represented everything Derek had lost. "Dr. Coleman, Dr. Harrison," Amber said brightly. "What a surprise to see you here." Natasha turned, her face carefully composed. "Mrs. Patterson. Mr. Patterson. Good evening." "Derek's doing wonderfully," Amber continued, oblivious to or ignoring the tension. "His recovery has been amazing. We were just talking about taking a vacation soon." "That's good to hear," James said politely. "Cardiac recovery requires time, but it sounds like you're progressing well." An awkward silence fell. Derek couldn't stop staring at Natasha. She looked radiant, happy, completely at ease. This was her world. Medicine, charity, making a difference. He'd never really belonged in it, had never understood why it mattered so much to her. "When are you due?" Amber asked, gesturing to Natasha's belly. 6 weeks, Natasha replied. "Though with twins they might come earlier." "Twins?" Derek repeated before he could stop himself. Natasha's hand moved to her belly. "Yes, 2 girls. We're very excited." "Twins." Derek felt the information hit him like a physical blow. Not just 1 baby but 2. 2 daughters. The family Natasha had always wanted, now building with someone else. Someone better. "Congratulations," Derek managed. "That's wonderful. Thank you." Natasha glanced at James, who smiled at her with such open affection that Derek had to look away. "We should go find our table," James said, clearly sensing Derek's discomfort. "It was nice to see you both." They moved away, absorbed immediately into another conversation. Derek watched them go, watched the easy way James's hand stayed on Natasha's back, watched the way she leaned into him slightly, trusting his support. "Derek." Amber touched his arm. "Are you okay? You're pale." "I need air," Derek said and walked quickly toward the hotel's terrace. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. Derek stood at the railing, his chest aching, not from his surgery but from a different kind of wound. One that wouldn't heal with time or medication or any amount of skilled intervention. He'd lost Natasha years ago, but seeing her tonight, seeing how happy she was, seeing the family she was creating with someone who deserved her, it made the loss feel fresh again. Real. Final. The terrace door opened and Derek tensed, expecting Amber. Instead, James Harrison stepped out, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Patterson. Mind if I join you?" Derek wanted to say yes, he minded very much. Instead he shrugged. "It's a free country." James stood beside him at the railing, both men looking out at the city lights. For a moment, neither spoke. Then James said, "Natasha told me about your history. About the marriage, the affair, the miscarriage. Everything." Derek's hands tightened on the railing. "What do you want me to say?" "Nothing. I just want you to hear something." James turned to face him. "That woman in there is the strongest, most brilliant person I've ever met. She survived what you did to her and became someone extraordinary. She built a career that saves lives. She earned respect through sheer excellence. And she learned to trust again, to love again, despite having every reason not to." "I know," Derek said miserably. "I know what I threw away." "No," James corrected. "You don't. Because you never really had her. You had a version of her that you wanted her to be, supportive but not too ambitious, caring but not too focused on her own goals, present but not too demanding of your attention. You never loved the real Natasha. You loved the idea of a wife who made you look good." Derek wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. Because James was right. "I love her exactly as she is," James continued. "Ambitious, dedicated, brilliant, focused. I love her late nights in the OR. I love her passion for medicine. I love that she cares more about saving lives than about dinner parties or social status. I love everything you criticized her for." "Why are you telling me this?" Derek asked. "Because I saw how you looked at her in there. Like you'd lost something precious. And I wanted you to know that you did. But it's not a loss you get to mourn. You chose to throw her away. She didn't leave you, you left her. So whatever you're feeling right now, whatever regret or grief or self-pity, you don't get to put that on her. She doesn't owe you closure or forgiveness or anything else. She gave you life itself when she performed that surgery. That's more than you deserved." James turned to go back inside, then paused. "She's moved on completely, Mr. Patterson. I suggest you do the same. For everyone's sake." He left Derek alone on the terrace, and Derek felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. James was right. Natasha had moved on. She'd built something beautiful from the ruins Derek had left her in. And he had no right to intrude on that, to burden her with his regrets, to seek absolution she shouldn't have to give. He'd survived physically. The surgery had worked. His heart was beating, would beat for decades more. But emotionally, spiritually, he felt like he was dying anyway, drowning in the consequences of choices he couldn't undo and couldn't escape. When Derek finally returned inside, Amber was talking with business associates. Natasha and James were seated at their table, surrounded by people who clearly respected them, laughing at something someone said. They looked happy. They looked complete. Derek realized he and Amber looked like that too to an outside observer. The successful businessman and his attractive wife. The picture of prosperity. But it was hollow. A performance they'd maintained so long that neither remembered why they'd started. That night, driving home, Amber finally asked, "Are you still in love with her?" "No," Derek said honestly. "I don't think I ever really loved her. Not the way she deserved. Not the way James loves her. That's the problem. I didn't appreciate what I had until I saw her thriving without me." "So what now?" Amber's voice was small, scared. "I don't know," Derek admitted. "I really don't know." But he knew one thing with certainty. Natasha Coleman had won. Not through revenge, not through cruelty, not through any effort at all. She'd won by simply living well, by becoming extraordinary, by finding genuine happiness with someone who treasured her. And Derek would spend the rest of his saved life living with that truth. Dr. Natasha Coleman stood at the front of the teaching amphitheater, a room filled with 50 medical students hanging on her every word. Her pregnant belly made moving around difficult, but she managed, using a pointer to indicate structures on the projected anatomy images. "Cardiac surgery requires 3 things," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Technical skill, which can be learned. Anatomical knowledge, which can be memorized. And composure under pressure, which must be developed through experience and self-awareness." A student raised her hand. "Dr. Coleman, how did you develop that composure? I feel like I panic every time something unexpected happens." Natasha smiled. "I panic too. Every surgeon does when complications arise. The difference is what you do with that panic. You acknowledge it. I'm scared, this is dangerous, this matters, and then you set it aside and focus on the problem. Your hands stay steady not because you're not afraid, but because you refuse to let fear control your actions." Another student spoke up. "Is it true you performed that pediatric valve replacement using a non-standard approach? My professor mentioned it in our cardiology lecture." "Yes," Natasha confirmed. "The standard approach wasn't working due to the patient's size and anatomy. So we modified technique intraoperatively. But that decision wasn't impulsive. It was based on understanding the underlying principles well enough to know when and how to deviate from protocol. She clicked to the next slide, showing a surgical image. This is why you study so hard now. Why you memorize until you dream in medical terminology. Why you practice on simulators until your hands ache. Because someday someone's life will depend on your knowledge and skill, and you need to be ready. The students nodded seriously, scribbling notes. Natasha felt a wave of fatigue wash over her but pushed through. She had 10 more minutes of lecture, then she could sit down. Remember, she concluded, surgery is not about ego. It's not about being the best or getting recognition. It's about the moment when a family gets to take their loved one home healthy. That's the reward. That's what makes the brutal hours and constant stress worthwhile. Questions? A dozen hands shot up, and Natasha spent another 20 minutes fielding inquiries about technique, residency applications, and career paths. By the time she dismissed the class, she was exhausted. James was waiting outside the amphitheater with a protein bar and water. You did great, but you need to sit down. I'm fine, Natasha protested, even as she gratefully took the food. You're 8 months pregnant with twins and you just stood for 90 minutes teaching, James said firmly. You're not fine, you're stubborn. There's a difference. Natasha laughed, allowing him to guide her to a nearby bench. They sat together and she ate while James rubbed her swollen feet through her shoes without being asked. You don't have to do that, she said. I want to. James looked up at her. I love taking care of you. Let me. I'm not used to it, Natasha admitted. Being taken care of. I know. That's part of what I love about you, your fierce independence. But you can be independent and still let people help. They're not mutually exclusive. A group of residents passed by, several waving respectfully. Dr. Coleman. Great lecture on valve repair last week. Natasha waved back, then turned to James. Did you hear about the surgery scheduled for tomorrow? The 18-year-old with the congenital defect. I did. Are you taking it? I think I should. It's complex, but I've done similar procedures. And Dr. Rodriguez is available as backup if needed. James studied her face. You're not going to take maternity leave until you absolutely have to, are you? I have 6 weeks, Natasha said. Maybe 5. I can do a lot in 5 weeks. Or, James suggested gently, you could rest. Prepare for the babies. Set up the nursery. Take some time for yourself. I'll have months of maternity leave for that, Natasha countered. Right now there are patients who need surgery. There are residents who need teaching. There's work to be done. James shook his head, smiling. You're impossible. You knew that when you asked me to move in with you. I did. And I love every impossible inch of you. He helped her stand. Come on. I'm taking you home for a real meal and a nap. I have rounds. Which Dr. Martinez is covering. I already checked. James took her back. Home. No. Doctor's orders. Natasha let him lead her to the car, too tired to argue. In the parking garage, she saw a familiar vehicle and froze. Derek's expensive SUV, parked near the entrance. What's wrong? James asked, following her gaze. Nothing, Natasha said quickly. Just tired. But as they drove home, she wondered why Derek was at the hospital. His follow-up appointment should be with his regular cardiologist now, not at Metro General. Was he having complications? Or was he looking for her? She pushed the thought away. Derek wasn't her concern anymore. He was just another patient she'd successfully treated. Nothing more. At home, James insisted on cooking while Natasha lay on the couch with her feet elevated. Their apartment was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the city. The nursery was nearly complete. 2 cribs, a changing table, shelves full of baby books. Everything was ready for their daughters. Have you thought more about names? James called from the kitchen. I have a few ideas, Natasha replied. But I want to meet them first. See what fits. That's very you, James said, bringing her a plate of pasta. Evidence-based baby naming. Natasha laughed. Everything's evidence-based with me. You knew that. They ate together, talking about patients, upcoming surgeries, and nursery details. This was Natasha's life now, this comfortable partnership, this shared understanding, this genuine affection. It felt nothing like her marriage to Derek had felt. Derek had made her feel small, inadequate, like she was always falling short of expectations. James made her feel seen, valued, celebrated for exactly who she was. I love you, she said suddenly. James smiled, reaching over to take her hand. I love you too. And I'm so proud of you. For everything you've accomplished, everything you've survived, everything you've become. Natasha felt tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy hormones probably, but also genuine emotion. I never thought I'd have this. This life. This happiness. After Derek, I thought maybe I wasn't meant for it. Derek was an idiot, James said bluntly. He had something precious and didn't value it. But his loss was my gain, so I can't be too angry at him. He saw us at that charity dinner last week, Natasha said. He looked miserable. Good, James said without sympathy. He should be miserable. He treated you terribly. If seeing you happy makes him feel guilty, that's his problem, not yours. I know. But sometimes I wonder if I should feel more satisfaction about it. About him regretting everything. And instead I just feel nothing. He's irrelevant to my life now. That's healthy, James assured her. Indifference is better than anger. It means you've truly moved on. Had she though? Natasha wasn't sure. She didn't think about Derek daily anymore, but the charity dinner had stirred up old feelings. Not love, definitely not love. But something complicated and uncomfortable that she couldn't quite name. Later that night, after James had fallen asleep, Natasha lay awake feeling the babies move beneath her hands. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. Her daughters growing strong and healthy. The family she dreamed of having now becoming real. She thought about the baby she'd lost 3 years ago. The pregnancy she discovered on the worst day of her life. The tiny shoes she bought and never got to use. For a long time, that loss had felt like a punishment, like her body's way of acknowledging her marriage was over. But now, feeling these babies move, she wondered if maybe it had been a blessing in disguise. If she'd had Derek's baby, she'd be tied to him forever. They'd have to co-parent, negotiate custody, maintain contact. She'd never have been truly free to build this new life. Instead, she'd been released completely. She'd moved across the country, healed, found someone better, and created a family that had nothing to do with Derek. She'd won in every way that mattered. The next morning, Natasha was back at the hospital by 6, reviewing scans for the 18-year-old surgery. The congenital defect was complex. The patient had been born with malformed valves that had finally deteriorated to the point of needing replacement. It would be a long surgery, maybe 8 hours. James scrubbed in with her, along with 2 senior residents and a full surgical team. The patient, a young woman named Crystal, was terrified but trying to be brave. You're in excellent hands, Natasha told her before the anesthesia. I've done this procedure many times. You're going to be fine. Thank you, Dr. Coleman, Crystal whispered. My mom said you're the best. That you saved her friend's husband's life a few weeks ago. Natasha paused. What's your mom's friend's name? I don't know. But she said the surgeon was amazing. That you fixed his heart even though something complicated was going on. She said you were a real professional. It took Natasha a moment to understand. Crystal's mom's friend was Amber, Derek's wife. She'd been talking about Natasha's professionalism, probably without knowing Crystal would end up as Natasha's patient. Tell your mom thank you, Natasha said. Now close your eyes. Dr. Kim is going to help you sleep, and when you wake up, this will all be over. The surgery took 9 hours. The defect was worse than the scans had indicated, requiring extensive repair work. Natasha's hands cramped from the delicate work. Her back ached from standing. Her pregnant belly made reaching difficult. But she persevered, focused entirely on the young woman on her table. Finally, it was done. The valves were replaced, the heart muscle was repaired, everything was stable. Crystal would live. She'd have a normal life, fall in love, maybe have her own children someday. All because Natasha had the skill and determination to fix what was broken. In the scrub room afterward, Natasha leaned against the wall, exhausted. You need to take a break, James said firmly. No surgeries tomorrow. Doctor's orders. But. No buts. That was 9 hours on your feet while 8 months pregnant with twins. You're amazing, but you're not superhuman. You need rest. Natasha knew he was right. Okay. 1 day off. Then back to work. We'll discuss that tomorrow, James said diplomatically. As they walked to their offices, Natasha saw Derek in the hallway talking with a nurse. He looked healthier than at the charity dinner. Some color had returned to his face, his posture was stronger. He was recovering well from the surgery. Their eyes met across the corridor. Derek looked like he wanted to approach, but Natasha subtly shook her head and kept walking. She had nothing more to say to him. Nothing he needed to hear. She'd saved his life, proving she was better than his cruelty. She'd built a career he could never diminish. She'd found love he couldn't contaminate. She created a future he wasn't part of. That was enough. That was everything. Derek watched her walk away, her pregnant silhouette disappearing around a corner, and felt the finality of it. She was done with him. Completely, totally done. And he had to accept that. He went home to Amber, to his empty marriage, to the comfortable life that felt increasingly uncomfortable. And he tried not to think about the ticking of his mechanical heart, the steady reminder that Natasha Coleman had given him something he could never repay or deserve. Derek Patterson made his decision on a Tuesday evening. He'd been obsessing for weeks, replaying conversations in his mind, drafting and deleting emails, driving past Metro General without stopping. Amber had noticed his distraction, his distance, but when she asked about it, he had no good explanation. The truth was simple and shameful. He couldn't let go. Couldn't accept that Natasha had moved on so completely while he remained stuck in the past, haunted by what he destroyed. So he ordered flowers. Expensive ones, 24 roses in soft pink, the color Natasha had always loved. He wrote a card, "Thank you for saving my life. I'm sorry for everything. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Derek." He had them delivered to her office at the hospital. The next day his phone rang. An unfamiliar number. "Hello. Mr. Patterson, this is Dr. Coleman's assistant, Susan. I'm calling regarding the flowers you sent." Derek's heart sank at her tone. "Yes. Dr. Coleman asked me to inform you that she doesn't accept personal gifts from patients. The flowers have been distributed to other patients throughout the hospital. She appreciates the gesture but requests you refrain from sending anything else. Can I speak to her? Just for a minute? Dr. Coleman is in surgery. And even if she weren't, she's made it clear she has nothing to discuss with you. Please respect her wishes, Mr. Patterson." The line went dead. Derek sat staring at his phone, feeling foolish and frustrated. The flowers had been a mistake. But he couldn't shake the need to somehow make things right, to explain himself, to get some kind of closure. Over the following weeks, Derek tried various approaches, each one failing more spectacularly than the last. He sent a handwritten letter to her office. It came back unopened with a formal note from Susan. "Dr. Coleman does not accept personal correspondence from patients. If you have medical concerns related to your surgery, please contact your primary cardiologist." He tried calling the hospital, asking to speak with her. The switchboard operator politely but firmly informed him that doctors could not take personal calls during work hours, and would he like to leave a message? He declined. He even attempted to schedule a follow-up appointment at Metro General, thinking he could at least see her in a professional capacity. The scheduler informed him that his care had been transferred to his regular cardiologist and that Dr. Coleman would not be seeing him for routine follow-ups. Every avenue was blocked. Natasha had erected professional boundaries that were impenetrable, and her staff enforced them with ruthless efficiency. Derek's obsession grew worse. He found himself driving past the hospital regularly, sometimes parking and watching the entrances. He knew it was unhealthy, possibly even crossing into stalking territory, but he couldn't stop himself. He needed to see her, to talk to her, to somehow achieve the absolution she wouldn't grant. One afternoon he saw her leaving with James. She moved slowly now, her pregnancy making walking difficult. James kept his hand on her arm, protective and attentive. They were laughing about something, completely unaware of Derek sitting in his car 50 yards away. Derek watched them drive off together and felt a wave of despair so intense it made his chest hurt. Not his surgical sight. His heart, the emotional one, the one that had never worked properly and now seemed completely broken. That evening Derek went to a bar. He wasn't much of a drinker, his cardiac medications limited alcohol consumption, but he needed something to dull the constant ache of regret. He sat at the bar nursing a single beer, listening to other patrons talk and laugh around him. Rough day? The bartender was friendly, conversational. Rough life, Derek replied. Problems at work? Problems everywhere. Derek took a sip of beer. Ever do something you can't take back? Something so stupid that it ruins everything good you had? The bartender nodded. Sure. Everyone has. That's being human. What if the person you hurt won't forgive you? What if they've moved on and don't even care enough to be angry anymore? Then you let them go, the bartender said simply. You learn from it, do better next time and let them live their life in peace. That's all you can do. Derek knew the bartender was right. But knowing and accepting were different things. A few days later, Derek's desperation reached its peak. He learned through a business contact that Metro General was hosting a medical conference on cardiac innovations. Natasha would be presenting her research. It was open to the public for a registration fee. Derek registered, telling himself he just wanted to hear her speak, to see her in her element, to understand what made her so passionate about this work he'd never appreciated during their marriage. The conference was in the hospital's main auditorium. Derek arrived early, sitting in the back row, hoping to remain unnoticed. The room filled with doctors, medical students, and healthcare professionals, all eager to learn from the experts. Natasha was the keynote speaker. She walked onto the stage with James, both of them dressed professionally. Her pregnancy was very obvious now. She looked ready to give birth any moment. But her voice was strong and clear as she began her presentation. Minimally invasive cardiac surgery has revolutionized patient outcomes, she began, clicking through slides showing surgical techniques and patient data. By reducing trauma to the body, we decrease recovery time, minimize complications, and improve long-term survival rates. She spoke for 40 minutes, detailing research, showing videos of procedures, answering complex questions from the audience. Derek watched, mesmerized. This was Natasha in her element, brilliant, confident, commanding respect from everyone in the room. She was a force of nature, and he'd never truly appreciated it during their marriage. After the presentation there was a networking reception. Derek knew he should leave, knew staying was pushing boundaries Natasha had clearly established. But he lingered, watching from the edges as people congratulated her, asked for her contact information, expressed admiration for her work. Eventually the crowd thinned. James stepped away to talk with colleagues, and Natasha stood alone for a moment, looking tired. Derek made his move before he could talk himself out of it. Dr. Coleman. That was an incredible presentation. Natasha turned, saw him, and her expression hardened. Mr. Patterson, what are you doing here? I wanted to hear you speak, to understand what you do. That's inappropriate, Natasha said flatly. We're not friends. We're not anything except doctor and former patient. You need to leave. Please, Derek said desperately. Just give me 5 minutes. I need to apologize properly. I need you to understand. Understand what? Natasha interrupted, her voice sharp now. That you're sorry? I know you're sorry. You've made that clear through multiple inappropriate attempts to contact me. But your regret is your problem, Derek, not mine. I don't owe you forgiveness. I don't owe you closure. I don't owe you anything. I just want to explain. Explain what? That you cheated because I was working too much? That you ended our marriage because I didn't prioritize your needs? That you dismissed our baby because it was inconvenient? I lived through all of that, Derek. I don't need explanations. I need you to leave me alone. People were starting to notice the confrontation. James had turned, seeing Derek, and immediately beginning to move toward them. Natasha held up a hand, stopping him, handling this herself. You got your life back, Natasha continued, her voice low but intense. You got to marry Amber, keep your business, continue your comfortable existence. You lost nothing except a wife who was too focused on her career. That's what you told people, right? That I chose medicine over you? Well, you were right. I did choose medicine. And it was the best decision I ever made because medicine gave me purpose, respect, and eventually a family with someone who actually values me. I value you, Derek protested weakly. No, you don't, Natasha said firmly. You value the idea of me now that you see what I became. You value the prestige of being connected to a successful surgeon. You value the ego boost of thinking I still care about you. But you don't value me as a person. You never did. James reached them, his expression carefully neutral. Is there a problem here? Mr. Patterson was just leaving, Natasha said, not breaking eye contact with Derek. He won't be bothering us again. Derek, James said, his voice friendly but with an edge of warning, I think it's time for you to go home to your wife. Leave Natasha alone. She's asked you nicely multiple times. Don't make this become a hospital security issue. Derek looked between them, Natasha's cold certainty, James's protective stance, and felt the last of his hope crumble. They were a united front. There was no crack he could exploit, no opening he could use to insert himself back into her life. I'm sorry, he said one more time, knowing it was useless. I know, Natasha replied. Now go. Derek walked out of the auditorium, through the hospital corridors he'd walked as a patient, out into the parking lot where his expensive car waited. He sat behind the wheel for a long time, his hands shaking, his chest tight with emotions that had nothing to do with his repaired valve. He'd thought apologizing would help. He'd thought if he could just make Natasha understand his remorse, she'd grant him some measure of forgiveness. He'd thought closure was something he could achieve through persistence. But he'd been wrong. Closure wasn't something Natasha could give him. It was something he had to give himself. And that meant accepting that she didn't need his apologies, didn't want his explanations, and didn't think about him at all. She'd moved on completely. He was a footnote in her story, a brief chapter about surviving betrayal and becoming stronger. She was a major figure in his story, the woman he'd lost through his own stupidity, the symbol of everything he'd taken for granted. That asymmetry was painful but truthful. He mattered to her past. She mattered to his present and future, even though she wasn't part of either. At home, Amber was waiting, having made dinner. She looked hopeful when he walked in, like maybe tonight he'd finally be present, finally be the husband she'd signed up for. "How was your day?" she asked. Derek looked at her, young, pretty, willing to love him if he'd let her. Willing to build a life together if he'd stop obsessing about the past. She deserved better than what he was giving her. "It was long," he said. "But I think I finally understand something I should have learned a long time ago." "What's that?" "That some things can't be fixed. Some mistakes are permanent. And the best thing I can do is accept that and move forward." Amber studied his face. "Are you talking about Natasha?" "Yes. But also us." Derek sat down, suddenly exhausted. "I haven't been fair to you, Amber. I've been living in the past, obsessing about my ex-wife, making you compete with a ghost. That's not okay." "No, it's not," Amber agreed quietly. "I love you, Derek, but I can't keep being compared to someone you destroyed and then mourned. Either you're with me, really with me, or we need to end this." Derek knew she was right. He had a choice. He could keep drowning in regret, keep obsessing about Natasha, keep trying to rewrite history. Or he could let go, focus on his actual present, try to build something real with the person who was actually in his life. "I want to try," he said. "To be present. To move forward. I don't know if I can do it, but I want to try." Amber nodded slowly. "Then try. Really try. Because I'm not waiting forever." They ate dinner in careful conversation, both of them navigating this new honesty between them. It wasn't perfect. Derek still felt the ache of regret, still thought about Natasha more than he should. But maybe that was okay. Maybe he could carry those feelings while also trying to be better for the person who'd chosen to stay. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Natasha had gone into labor. Her water broke during the reception, and James had rushed her to the maternity wing, calling ahead to their obstetrician. "Twins don't wait for convenient timing," Dr. Sarachin said cheerfully, examining Natasha. "But you're both doctors. You know that." "I know," Natasha said through a contraction. "But I had 2 more surgeries scheduled this week." "They'll manage without you," James said firmly, holding her hand. "Right now, you focus on bringing our daughters into the world." The labor was long, 16 hours, but uncomplicated. Just after dawn the next morning, 2 healthy baby girls were born, each weighing just over 5 pounds. Natasha held them both, these tiny perfect humans she and James had created, and felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. "They're beautiful," James whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You're beautiful. This is everything." "This is everything," Natasha agreed. In that moment, Derek Patterson didn't exist in her thoughts. Her failed first marriage was irrelevant. The pain of her previous miscarriage was healed. There was only this: 2 babies, 1 partner, a life full of love and purpose and meaning. She'd won. Not through revenge or retribution, but through simply living well. Through becoming someone extraordinary. Through finding happiness despite the pain of her past. And that was the greatest victory of all. 6 months passed with the beautiful chaos that only newborn twins could bring. Natasha had taken a full 3-month maternity leave, longer than she'd initially planned, but James and the hospital administration had insisted. "You can't save other people's hearts if you don't take care of your own family," the chief of surgery had told her, and Natasha couldn't argue with that logic. Her daughters, Grace and Hope, names chosen for their meaning rather than their popularity, were thriving. Grace was the serious one, studying faces with intense concentration. Hope was the smiler, finding joy in everything. James was an exceptional father, getting up for night feedings without complaint, changing diapers with practiced efficiency, singing lullabies in his off-key but enthusiastic voice. Monica had visited from across the country, holding the babies and crying happy tears. "You did it, Tasha. You survived everything and built this beautiful life. I'm so proud of you." Natasha had felt that pride too. Every morning when she woke up to baby sounds and James making coffee, every evening when they sat together as a family, she felt the weight of how far she'd come. From the woman crying on Monica's couch 3 years ago to this. A mother, a partner, a successful surgeon. When she returned to work, it was with renewed purpose. The time away had reminded her why medicine mattered, why saving lives was worth the exhaustion and stress. But it had also taught her balance, that being an excellent surgeon didn't require sacrificing everything else. Her first surgery back was a complex valve replacement on a 60-year-old grandmother. The woman reminded Natasha of her own mother, who'd passed away years ago. She performed the surgery with the same meticulous care she always did, and when the grandmother woke up and immediately asked about her grandchildren, Natasha understood completely. "They're waiting for you," Natasha told her. "You'll be home with them soon." Life settled into a new rhythm. Surgeries and rounds, teaching and research, balanced with family time and self-care. James had taken a step back from his own surgical schedule, mentoring more and operating less, giving himself time to be present for the twins. They'd become partners in every sense, professionally, domestically, emotionally. Then came the letter. Not addressed to the hospital but to their home. A thick envelope with Derek's return address. Natasha held it for a long moment, deciding whether to open it or throw it away unopened like the others. James, feeding hope while Grace napped, noticed her hesitation. "From him?" "Yes." "Are you going to read it?" "I don't know. Does it matter what he says?" "Only if you need to hear it," James said carefully. "I support whatever you decide." Natasha opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long. She almost stopped after the first paragraph, but something made her continue. "Dear Natasha, I know you don't want to hear from me. You've made that clear and I respect it. This is the last communication I'll send. After this, I promise to leave you in peace. I'm writing because my therapist suggested it might help me process what I did to you, to our marriage, to the person you were before I broke you. She said writing it down might provide closure for me even if you never respond. So this is as much for me as it is for you. Maybe more for me if I'm honest. I've spent months trying to apologize, trying to make you understand my regret. But I realize now that was selfish. Your forgiveness isn't something I can earn or demand. It's something you give if and when you choose to, and you've chosen not to. That's your right. What I want to say instead is this: you were always enough. During our marriage, I made you feel inadequate, like your dedication to medicine was a flaw, like your ambition was something wrong. I was the problem, not you. I was insecure about my own achievements and resentful that you were building something more meaningful than real estate development. I wanted you to be smaller so I could feel bigger. That was cruel and unfair. I destroyed our marriage not because of anything you did wrong, but because I was too immature to appreciate what I had. You were working 18-hour shifts to become excellent at something that saves lives. I was building condos and acting like I was doing something important. The disparity bothered me, so I tore you down instead of celebrating you. The affair with Amber wasn't about her being better than you or giving me something you didn't. It was about ego and cowardice. She was easy. She didn't challenge me or make me feel inadequate by being extraordinary. She just agreed with everything I said and made me feel like I was impressive. You had your own opinions, your own goals, your own identity separate from being my wife. And instead of loving that about you, I resented it. When you told me you were pregnant, I should have been thrilled. We talked about having children someday. But I'd already decided to leave, and a baby would have complicated that. So I said something unforgivable. I told you to get rid of it. I dismissed our child like it was nothing. And then you lost the baby, and I told myself it wasn't my fault, that it was just bad timing. But I know the stress of the divorce and my cruelty contributed to that miscarriage. I carry that guilt every day. I've seen you twice since the surgery, at the charity dinner and at your presentation. Both times I saw how happy you are, how successful you've become, how loved you are by James and respected by your colleagues. I saw that you built everything you said you would, and you did it without me. Maybe because you were finally free of me. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. You were right that I was holding you back. You were right that I didn't value your ambitions. You were right that I was selfish and cruel. You were right to move on completely and build a life without me in it. I hope your daughters grow up knowing their mother is exceptional. I hope they learn from your strength and determination. I hope they never settle for someone who makes them feel small. I'm trying to do better. I'm in therapy. Amber and I are working on our marriage, trying to build something honest instead of something based on rebellion and ego. I don't know if we'll make it, but I'm trying. Not to win you back. I know that door is permanently closed, but because I want to be better than the man who hurt you. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for being professional when you had every right to refuse. Thank you for showing me, through your success and happiness, what I threw away. And thank you for finally being free of me. I wish you every happiness. You've earned it, Derek. Natasha finished reading and set the letter down. She felt something. Not forgiveness exactly. Not absolution. But maybe understanding. Derek had finally stopped trying to minimize what he'd done. He'd stopped making excuses. He'd accepted responsibility and acknowledged the full weight of his cruelty. It didn't change the past. It didn't heal the old wounds instantly. But it felt like the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Final. Complete. What did it say? James asked gently. That he knows he was wrong. That I was always enough. That he's sorry. Natasha looked at her sleeping daughter. Everything he should have said 3 years ago but didn't. How do you feel? Like I can finally close that chapter completely. Not because he gave me permission but because he finally stopped trying to rewrite history. He accepted the truth. That feels like closure. James nodded. Are you going to respond? No. What would I say? I don't forgive him in the way he probably wants. I don't wish him ill, but I don't particularly wish him well either. He's just someone I used to know. Someone I've moved past. Responding would reopen a door I want to stay closed. That's fair. Natasha put the letter in a drawer. Maybe someday she'd show it to Monica, or maybe she'd just leave it there, unimportant and forgotten. Either way, it didn't have power over her anymore. 3 weeks later, Natasha received a phone call from Stanford University. They wanted her to present her research on minimally invasive cardiac surgery at their annual medical symposium. It was one of the most prestigious conferences in the field, attended by the best cardiac surgeons in the world. It's a huge honor, James said when she told him. You should absolutely go. But the girls will be fine for 3 days with me, James assured her. This is important, Natasha. This is your work being recognized at the highest level. Don't turn it down. So Natasha went to Stanford. She presented her research to a packed auditorium, fielded questions from renowned surgeons, networked with colleagues who'd followed her work. It was intimidating and exhilarating. During the conference dinner, she sat next to Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, her former mentor. I'm proud of you, Dr. Rodriguez said. When I met you 3 years ago, you were brilliant but broken. Look at you now. You're one of the leading cardiac surgeons in the country, and you're only 32. I had a good teacher, Natasha said. And you had determination, Dr. Rodriguez replied. You could have let what that man did to you destroy your career. Instead, you used it as fuel. That's rare. That evening, alone in her hotel room, Natasha allowed herself to reflect on her journey. 3 years ago, she'd been a resident whose world had collapsed. Divorced, grieving a miscarriage, unsure if she could continue. Now she was a senior cardiac surgeon, a mother, a partner to someone who loved her completely, and a presenter at Stanford's medical symposium. She'd won. Not through revenge. Not through making Derek suffer. But through sheer excellence and determination. She'd become everything he'd told her she couldn't be. She'd proved him wrong in every way that mattered. The next day, her presentation was covered by several medical journals. The headline in Cardiac Surgery Today read, Dr. Natasha Coleman's innovative techniques revolutionize valve replacement outcomes. There were quotes from other surgeons praising her work, mentions of her research, details about her success rate. Natasha sent a photo of the article to James and Monica. James replied immediately, That's my brilliant fiancé. The girls and I are so proud. Wait, fiancé? Natasha stared at the message. They talked about marriage eventually, but James had never formally proposed. Her phone rang. Surprise ruined, James said when she answered, laughing. I was planning to ask properly when you got home. With a ring and everything. But I got excited and accidentally jumped the gun. Ask me now, Natasha said, smiling. I can't. You can't see the ring. It's a whole thing. Just pretend you didn't see that message. Act surprised when you get home. I love you, Natasha said. I love you too. Now go accept more accolades and stop ruining my proposal plan. When Natasha returned home 3 days later, James was waiting with the twins, a candlelit dinner, and a ring that took her breath away. He got down on one knee right there in their living room while Grace and Hope babbled happily in their playpen. Natasha Coleman, you are the strongest, most brilliant, most exceptional person I've ever met. You've taught me what it means to truly partner with someone, to celebrate their success, support their dreams, and build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. Will you marry me? Yes, Natasha said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. The ring fit perfectly. They kissed while the twins clapped their small hands, delighted by the excitement even if they didn't understand it. That night, after James had fallen asleep, Natasha stood at the window holding Hope, who'd woken for a late-night feeding. She looked out at the city lights, at the world that had once seemed so dark and now felt full of possibility. She thought about Derek briefly, not with anger or pain but with indifference. He was living his life somewhere in this city. Maybe he and Amber were happy. Maybe they weren't. Either way, it had nothing to do with Natasha anymore. She'd survived his betrayal. She'd built something beautiful from the ruins. She'd proved that the cruelty of one person didn't have to define your entire life. She'd won by becoming someone extraordinary, someone respected, someone loved. And now she was getting married to a man who valued every part of her, who celebrated her ambition, who shared her dreams. She was raising daughters who would grow up seeing their mother as strong and capable. She was saving lives, teaching residents, changing medicine. This was her victory. Not dramatic. Not vengeful. Just a quiet, profound triumph of survival and excellence. Hope finished nursing and fell asleep in Natasha's arms. Natasha carried her to the nursery, placed her gently in her crib beside Grace, and stood watching them both breathe peacefully. "You're going to have such a different life than I did," she whispered. "You're going to know you're valued. You're going to see what partnership looks like. You're going to learn that you can be ambitious and loving, successful and kind, that you don't have to choose between career and family. You're going to know you're enough exactly as you are." She kissed them both and returned to bed, sliding in beside James, who automatically reached for her even in sleep. This was happiness. This was success. This was everything she'd ever wanted and more than she dared to hope for after Derek. She'd won. Completely, finally, beautifully.